just the depth of love and appreciation for my wife that her colleagues were able to express within 24 hours of her death for the world to see. And since then, the tributes that have come in to our home from the notes and letters and cards that we've received, emails that I've gotten, and the telephone calls from all over the world, it truly astounds you. There's a stack this high on the dining room table waiting for Glenn and Nehemiah to go through it. Because if they do, they'll learn a lot about their mom that I don't think they know. So thanks to everyone for all of this. I didn't trust speaking off the cuff at a time like this, so I wrote down some remarks and I'm going to read them to you. Reflections on an intellectual partner. My intellectual partnership with Linda Datcher Loury began 37 years ago in the fall of 1974 when Linda enrolled in the doctoral program in economics at MIT. I had arrived at MIT 2 years previous to that, and while trying to settle on a thesis topic, I supplemented my income by providing tutoring services for students taking their first year microtheory sequence. Our relationship began with me trying to help Linda decode Paul Samuelson's fascinating, though often rambling lectures on welfare economics and help her comprehend Marty Weitzman's rigorous, though mathematically demanding and sometimes obscure derivations of the Kuhn-Tucker theorem. I thank God that our friendship did not end there. Suffice it to say that Linda cleared these formidable hurdles of the program's first year with ease, and that our friendship moved beyond the stuff of problem sets to find, shall we say, more fertile ground. By the time I left MIT to take my first teaching job at Tufts University, Linda and I had become very close indeed. Over the next 2 years, with Linda remaining in Cambridge and me in Chicago, our bonds of intimacy easily bridged the 1,000 miles separating us. And after Linda completed her dissertation in 1978, she went on to take her first job on the research staff of the Survey Research Center in the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. I joined her in Ann Arbor as an associate professor of economics 1 year later. And there we finally became a couple, destined to spend the next 32 years building our lives together. As you know, Linda was an empirical labor economist, and in those years I thought of myself primarily as an economic theorist. Thus, one might imagine that whatever the strength of our personal connections, we would not have much to talk about as far as research was concerned. She'd be busy running her regressions, and I'd be preoccupied with proving my theorems. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Linda and I had a lot to say to one another about research. We talked economics incessantly. It was a 30-year conversation. And what always came as something of a surprise to me, we talked economics incessantly. I was interested in her data and learned from her enormously in those years, and what always came as a surprise to me, she was genuinely interested in my theoretical work. She forced me to tell her the significance of my latest theorem, in plain English, please. And she always insisted if I couldn't make her, a non-mathematician, understand the logic of my result, then evidently I didn't really understand it myself. Our intellectual partnership was noteworthy from both a substantive and a stylistic point of view. As for the style of our interactions, let's just say there was never a dull moment. To be sure, our personalities were very different. I was the hothead given to vituperation and verbal excess, especially in the heat of argument, even being known to raise my voice on the rare occasion when that seemed necessary. Linda was calm, less given to the rhetorical flourish or the ostentatious display of erudition, though her learning in the applied social science literature was every bit as broad and as deep as my own. She was quicker to admit error, and less in need than was I of having the last word in an argument. But she was also enormously tough-minded, even stubborn, I sometimes thought. When it came to arguing about ideas, Linda would not be intimidated or browbeaten. I know because I tried. She gave just as good as she got. In our discussions about economic inequality, about race and labor market, about intergenerational mobility and the economics of the family, about affirmative action, about labor unions and the decline of American manufacturing, about minimum wage legislation, about welfare reform, or about the merits of certain black public intellectuals who will remain unnamed here. To give a few examples, our discussions were invariably of great value to me. You see, I suffered from the theorist's disease of glossing too quickly over the facts in my rush to find an elegant abstract formulation. An idea this beautiful must be true, was my basic attitude. Linda, with feet planted firmly on the ground, would invariably say something like, "How could you possibly know that?" Or, "What evidence is there for this assumption?" Or, "How exactly would you test that implication?" Or, "How could we even in principle take this to the data?" Sadly, I often had no good answer to any of those questions. Thank God the referees were publishing me anyway. Anyway, Linda Datcher Loury was also a source of encouragement and moral support for me in my intellectual work over the course of our partnership. There are books and papers out there with my name on them that would never have been written but for her steadfast support, her encouragement, and, quite frankly, her cajoling. She often seemed to believe in me and in my ideas even more than I did myself. During my conservative phase, when I moved to the right on issues of race and social policy in the 1980s, she often disagreed with particulars, especially this bit about voting for Ronald Reagan. But she stood with me and even pushed me further on some of my most controversial themes, like the crucial importance of acknowledging and rectifying patterns of behavior within black communities that contributed to African American social disadvantage. She was not afraid of political correctness. She also had an exceptionally strong work ethic. She was disciplined and organized in the conduct of her research. She met her deadlines and burned the midnight oil when that was necessary. I am, shall we say, a bit more relaxed about deadlines. I tend to procrastinate and to let things slide. We walked into this event 5 minutes before it started because I was still working on the text that I'm reading to you right now. Linda served me as a taskmaster by gently but insistently reminding me to get my work done, but even more importantly, she inspired, and the truth be told, shamed me into productivity simply by putting her nose to the grindstone. That is, by productively and responsibly using her time. I can tell you that it's hard to be a laggard when you're living with somebody like that. Or maybe it's hard to live with somebody like that when you're being a laggard. Linda's important work in social economics has been described already by others, so I won't dwell on the details. Let me tell you, though, that she got her professional start at the Institute for Social Research in the late 1970s, and that was a real boon for both of us. As many of you know, the Social Research Center at the Institute for Social Research at Michigan was home to the panel study of income dynamics, that longitudinal survey of 5,000 American families who were being followed year to year and questioned about all manner of economic and social factors. For someone interested in the intergenerational transmission of economic status, as were Linda and I, this unique early longitudinal data set was a veritable gold mine. A number of Linda's early and important papers draw on these data. She later came to rely also heavily on the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, which was being initiated in those years. Linda's involvement at the center of Michigan's longitudinal data collection effort opened a window for me onto the subtle and complex issues involved in the gathering, collating, and processing of social data. Her work and that of others using these data also provided confirmation for me of the importance for determining the later life success realized by young people of the family structure, neighborhood organization, and social interactions to which they were exposed in their formative years. Many of my own papers on the theory of income dynamics, on persistent racial inequality, on the economics of affirmative action policies, on the distinction between discrimination and stigma in explaining racial economic disparities, on the rationality of dysfunctional identities, and on the self-confirming nature of racial stereotypes are all profoundly and positively influenced by my intellectual partnership with Linda Datcher Loury. So, speaking as a husband and a father, of course, I will miss my wife tremendously. But speaking as a scholar, I can tell you that I will see things less clearly, express myself less surely, meet my deadlines less frequently, and ponder the often incomprehensible nature of social life with less confidence without my intellectual companion and life partner. The light of understanding for me has grown dimmer, and the path ahead is unclear.
Co-pastor of Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, to which Linda belonged. I'm a 1976 alum of the Tufts Medical School, and it is my privilege to come before you. Last month, we gathered in Bethel to celebrate the life and the legacy of Linda Datcher Loury. Wife, mother, sister, friend, and it is particularly gratifying to hear each of you as her colleagues, her students, her teachers share your sentiments. I've chosen as a reading the words of Henry Nouwen, renowned theologian and esteemed teacher, particularly appropriate for we as we gather at this community, teaching, therefore, as first of all, the creation of a space where students and teachers can enter into a fearless communication with each other and allow their respective life experiences to be their primary and most valuable source of growth and maturation. Teaching asks for a mutual trust, which those who teach and those who want to learn can become present to each other, not as opponents, but as those who share in the same struggle and search for the same truth. Today we celebrate the life of an amazing woman, a teacher, a student herself, who clearly shared out of her own experience and held all of us to a higher standard in the search for the truth. And even as we celebrate, we acknowledge that we miss Linda. There's a hole in our soul. Even as we celebrate the richness of her life, we miss Linda. I want to share with you an illustration that my husband used as he concluded his very elegant eulogy to Linda as an admonition of where we go from here. He reminded us of having the experience of perhaps watching a television show, one that we're totally into, and we're just at the point of getting to the climax, anticipating fully to find out what the end will be. And suddenly, unexpectedly, 3 words flash across the screen: to be continued. Oh! Horrors. We find ourselves perhaps angry, disappointed, frustrated, and just getting caught up in the madness of that moment. reminder that we can either stay mired in that place or go about the business of doing the work at hand, knowing that next week, next month, we will see the end of the story. In many ways, as we consider all that Linda contributed to so many lives, it's as though we are meeting her and the frame is frozen, and across the story of her life appears the words, "to be continued." That would be the greatest gift to Linda, that we would continue the legacy that she started. To be continued by students like Jonathan and Daniel, transcending their fears to take on the complexities of partial derivatives, to knock at the doors of opportunity in search of answers to deeper questions, to be continued by colleagues in the department committed to tending the roots of the discipline and nurturing the fruits like Yanis and George, committed to careful, meticulous, no-nonsense research, fueled by palpable intellectual integrity about real people living life in real time, to be continued by her mentees who would become mentors like Roland, with common sense enough to celebrate the number 9, appreciate the authenticity of a good gut bucket laugh, and to respect brutal, loving candor, and to be transparent enough to say, if only I could have done it again. To be continued by her family, Glenn, and Nehemiah. Linda loved you so much. You were the wind beneath her wings. And because of your devotion to her, she believed and made us all believe that we can fly. And so the work of Linda is to be continued. Every day that we choose to live our lives with grace, to model her realness, to go forward with dignity and integrity, we continue Linda's life. At the end of our service, we asked the congregation to stand. And in that final moment, to do the thing that we would do for every esteemed professor who really has poured sacrificially to our lives. I ask that you would stand and give Linda a standing ovation for a life well lived and a legacy to be continued.